And now turning to China and space. U.S. Space Force Lieutenant General B. Chance Saltzman says that China is the U.S.'s biggest threat in the space sector. He's a nominee to lead Space Force. In a hearing, he said, quote, "The Chinese are aggressively pursuing capabilities that can disrupt, degrade, and ultimately even destroy our satellite capabilities and disrupt our ground infrastructure." Saltzman said it would be a priority for him to ensure Space Force is able to counter strategic competitors, because he says adversaries are aggressively trying to dominate space and putting U.S. interests at risk. If confirmed, Saltzman will serve as the second chief of space operations. And here to talk more about the U.S.-China space race is Arthur Herman. He's the director of the Quantum Alliance Initiative at the Hudson Institute. Arthur, thanks for coming on today. So let me ask you, Space Force nominee B. Chance Saltzman recently said the Chinese are pursuing capabilities that can destroy U.S. satellites and disrupt ground infrastructure. And I think this kind of relates to your space race article on the Wall Street Journal. So I want to ask you what Saltzman says. How big of a concern is it? Tell us more about it.
Well, it's a serious concern, and the Chinese have been working on this at least since the early 2000s. And in fact, they did a proof of demonstration back in January of 2007, in which they actually were able to execute an anti-satellite tool, a kill vehicle to blow up a satellite, thus demonstrating that it can be done and that they had the capability. That was in 2007. We are now 15 years along, and General Saltzman, it seems, is just bringing this news to the public that this is a serious concern, a serious worry. Look, think about what can be done if you have anti-satellite capabilities and you're able to put anti-satellite kill vehicles into and launch them and knock out, let's say, GPS. I mean, think about the long-term and short-term chaos that would create, not just for all of us, who depend now today on GPS for navigation and for tracking, but also for our military as well, because so much of what they do relies upon proper targeting, relies on proper positioning vis-a-vis other forces, and all this is enabled via satellite. So an attack on GPS would have a devastating impact in the case of a conflict, let's say over Taiwan, of basically crippling the United States' ability to deal effectively with a Chinese threat against Taiwan. And I think the point I was stressing in my Wall Street Journal piece on winning the new space race is that in the 21st century, who controls space controls everything. I mean, not just telecommunications, not just navigation, but you basically have the ability then to direct and coordinate what happens at sea, on land. Our economic assets more and more depend on their ability to interface with satellite technology and space technology.
Arthur, we talk about China overtaking the U.S. as the dominant power in space. But how likely is that, would you say? Do you think that would happen, let's say, sometime in the next 10 years?
I think it's an alarming prospect. And this is not just my conclusion, based on watching how China's developments in areas like anti-satellite warfare since 2007. I've been tracking what they've been doing, and it's a scary proposition. But it's also the conclusion of the most recent report, the State of the Space Industrial Base in America, a report done by Space Force, by the Defense Innovation Unit, and also the Air Force Research Lab, in which the 350 participants in that discussion, in preparing that report, concluded for the very first time that China could overtake the United States as the dominant player in the space domain by 2032. That's in 10 years. And that's not just a indication of how fast China is moving and learning how to become a major space player in terms of space terms of launches, satellites, anti-satellites, turning lunar exploration into a means by which to secure, control, and prevent access to space for others. It's also is an indication that we're just not doing what we need to be doing here. We're standing still and they're moving fast. That's how they're going to beat us.
Right. Let me just ask you one last thing. You bring up a very practical concern. If China becomes the dominant power in space, would they be able to read for example, our everyday text? Would it go to that extent?
They may already be able to do that with TikTok. So, I mean, they're already achieving that at a terrestrial level without having to go to space in order to do that. But yes, I mean, the ways in which more and more telecommunication will depend upon space link in order to achieve that gives you an idea about just what would happen if China becomes the arbiter, right, and is able to decide what you can watch and what you can't, what kinds of text messages you're able or videos you're able to send or watch. This war in Ukraine has demonstrated very much how important and how vital space and space technology is going to be. The role that Starlink has played, for example, in helping to keep the internet open for the Ukrainian people and for Ukrainian military gives you some idea about just what a crucial high ground this is going to be for our military, for our intelligence services, for our own everyday lives. And so the question is, who's going to enforce the rules? Who's going to create the rules? That's what the future of space is really all about. And I wrote this op-ed for the Wall Street Journal so I could make people aware of just how big the stakes are in deciding who wins this new space race with China.
All right. Thank you very much, Arthur Herman, Director of the Quantum Alliance Initiative at Hudson Institute. Pleasure speaking to you today.
The pleasure been all mine.